Hey, everybody, this is Mike Weinberg, and I am thrilled to have my good friend Paul Smith with me here today. Paul and I became authors about the same time. Paul, I don't know, when did your first book release? When did Lead with the Story come out?
Yeah, August of 2012. And I think you were September of the same year or close to that.
I was, and your book had a huge impact on me. Those of you that can see over my shoulder here, Paul's first book has been a runaway bestseller. It's called Lead with a Story. And as I was in the formative years of trying to become a better speaker, Paul, your book was just revolutionary for me in understanding the power of a story and how to use a story. And because we had the same publisher, they introduced us, and it just kind of we built a friendship from there. So I'm honored to have you on here because we have some big news that I'm pretty pumped to share with my audience. So thank you for joining me for a few minutes here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm flattered to be here and flattered that you enjoyed the book. Thank you.
Yeah, I did, and not only did I enjoy your first book, but I will say that not only did I enjoy your latest book, Sell with a Story, but I was flattered you asked and honored to write the foreword for you. I said in the foreword, and I meant it, that I really feel like people that read this book and implement what you're suggesting in terms of storytelling can experience a radical transformation in their success. So I'm thrilled to have you and bring you to my audience. So let me share a few words about Paul, and
Sure.
I'll include some more details in the written piece that goes along with this video. But Paul's had quite a career. He was a consultant at Accenture. He just wrapped up recently a 20-year fantastic run at Procter & Gamble before he left there to launch out on his own. He's got a great podcast. Sell with a Story is his third book. He is one of the world-renowned experts in the power of storytelling. And those of you that know me, follow me, know the story and the sales story is one of my favorite topics. Paul takes that to an entirely new level. In fact, he has much greater parameters around what storytelling is and isn't and what qualifies as a story. So I wanted to bring him to you because I think this book can really help your sales results and your effectiveness. So Paul, let me ask you, let's talk about just the word story, because I think it means something even different when I use it than when you use it. What prompted your interest in the whole art, I'll say art and science, of storytelling, and why are stories so important?
Yeah, so I might be a slow learner, but probably 15 or so years into my career at Procter & Gamble, it finally dawned on me that storytelling was an important component of great leadership. And as you know, the topic of the first book is really storytelling for leadership. But it wasn't something that I recall learning in college, certainly not in business school. They didn't teach me that when I joined the company. And so I kind of set out on my own learning journey to figure it out. So that's how I got interested. But why I think it's so important is just that it's so much more effective than just lecturing to people, or as a boss telling them what to do, or as a parent wagging your finger at your kids and telling them what to do. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that it's most of the cognitive science that's been done in the last couple of decades has told us that human beings make subconscious, emotional, sometimes irrational decisions in one place in their brain, and then they justify that logically and rationally in another place in their brain. So if you want to influence people, so whether that's leadership or parenting or selling, it turns out you need to influence those emotional centers of the brain and not just the logic centers. You need to do both. And facts and logic and data just don't do that, but storytelling definitely does.
So that's so interesting hearing that coming from you, because you're quite analytical, right? And you, unlike my books where I share a lot of anecdotes, you do a ton of research. I don't know, how many people did you interview? I know you've interviewed hundreds over the course of all of your books. What was your process? Just share with the audience, because I think this is really interesting. You really dug deep. In fact, I was one of the people, along with a lot of folks in the sales improvement community, you asked for introduction to top sellers. So who'd you talk to and why, and what did that look like, the research process?
Yeah, so for each of the books, like you said, I've interviewed probably 250 or 300 people by now, like in-depth, one-on-one interviews that last, sometimes 2 or 3 hours. And for the sales book, it was mostly salespeople, obviously successful salespeople at companies like Microsoft and Costco and Xerox and Abercrombie and Fitch and Hewlett Packard and dozens of others. And as I was getting into that, I ended up actually not just interviewing salespeople, but I ended up interviewing procurement managers, so professional buyers. And I kind of did it as you know, almost on a lark when I started. I thought, well, I'll throw some buyers in there as well, but mostly I need to interview salespeople. And then by the end of the research, I absolutely convinced myself that I learned more from the professional buyers than I did the professional salespeople about what
Hold
makes
that
a
thought
great
too.
salesperson. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that because that's one of the big outtakes of the book of some things you heard from buyers that I really think salespeople need to take heed. So let's hang on to that thought. So you interviewed a couple hundred people, but what struck me in your opening comments, by nature, aren't you an analytical? Weren't you a more an analyst? And you've come around to where you feel like the story is so important for engaging not just the mind but the heart as well. Did I hear you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an amateur science geek on the weekend kind of thing. So very much started out my career in finance and accounting, and so this whole storytelling thing did not necessarily come natural to me. It was a skill that I wanted to learn, and that was, in fact, one of the best things I think I learned is that you can learn it. You know, it's not like you've got to be born with the skill or you'll never be good at it. It's like music or art. Yeah, some people are naturally gifted at it, and some people are not, but if you wanted to learn to play the guitar, you could probably take some guitar lessons and you could probably learn to strum out a few tunes, right? I think storytelling's the same way.
Okay, so this is going to sound crazy. I'm actually asking you this, but you say not everything's a story. So what's a story?
Yeah.
And what are the critical elements that make something a compelling story?
Yeah, so I think the word story in the last at least decade or so has come to take on a lot more meaning than it was ever originally intended to, and that's fine. I'm not going to complain about that, but people will say, "Oh, our marketing plan's a story, our vision statement's a story, our brand logo tells a story." I mean, everything's kind of become a story, and when everything is a story, really, really nothing's a story, right? So when I talk about storytelling, I mean real, honest to goodness stories, like the kind of thing, if you were to tell it to your kid and say, was that a story? They'd go, yeah, that was a story. But if you tell a sales pitch to a kid, they'll say that wasn't a story. That was a sales pitch, right? Or you were lecturing to me or something like that. So a story has components that other things don't, like a time and a place and a main character. And that main character has a goal, and there's probably someone or something getting in the way of them achieving that goal. And there are events that transpire over time. And those are the things that should clue you into a story is happening right now instead of something else.
Okay, that's really helpful. So let's bring that in to two things. One is, can you talk about the difference, because you started to go down that path, the difference between a story and a sales pitch? And then why don't you go ahead and bring in the thing with the buyer? Because one of the things that struck me is where you spent all this time with procurement people, and they also then helped you see where salespeople really botch the story, and it's very transparent. So I'm curious. So what's the difference between a story and a sales pitch, and what did you learn from procurement people about how they're evaluating our stories?
Yeah. So imagine it's Monday morning, right? It's 9:00. You and I and a few other people are in a meeting, and we're preparing for a big sales call that's going to happen in a few days. And the boss comes in and leans out over the table and says, "All right, people, what's our story?" Right? You don't think for a minute that what she or he means is a story like I'm talking about a story. What they probably mean is, what is the logical series of facts and data and arguments that we're going to put together, probably in a PowerPoint presentation, that we're going to essentially read to the buyer such that by the end of the meeting, we've got the best chance of them buying whatever it is we're selling. That's what they probably mean. And that's fine. That's you need that when you're going into a sales call. But that's not a story, right? And a story, and the buyers that I talked to kind of get to your second part of that question, one of the questions I asked them was, what makes a sales pitch sound like a sales pitch, right? And the answers I got, and they used all kinds of creative ways to say the word vomit, that more than I've ever heard, right? It's like, or it just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I hear the tone of voice change, and I know they've gone into sales mode, or when they start reciting something that I can tell they've memorized, or that was written down as opposed, written to be read as opposed to written to be told. And it just, all of that makes it so obvious that the sales pitch is on now. The conversation is done. We've had our little chit chat at the beginning but now you're trying to sell me something, and their defenses go up, and their frowns come on, and they fold their arms, and they get very critical and analytical, and they're ready to tear apart every one of your arguments. And That's not what you want, right? You want them to open up. And stories, when you start telling a real story, which I'll give you an example of in a second if you want one, people just start to listen. They just open up their minds and their heart, and their body posture opens up, and they just listen, which is what you want them to do.
Before you go on and give us an example of a real story, I want every salesperson and every sales leader that just watched this to go rewind 2 minutes and listen to what Paul just said again. I can't even editorialize on that. It was so good. I don't even want to try to encapsulate what you said. But let me ask you one question, because I really thought this was intriguing. And then I do want you to give us an example of the story. You said that buyers took note of when the salesperson's tone of voice would change and they went into pitch mode.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I'm constantly reminding salespeople about, not putting on a sales voice, because they think they're supposed to be in sales mode, and it does the exact opposite of what we wanted to do. We don't want to be lumped in with all the sellers. We want to be a human, and we want to communicate. Right. So what, in your mind, what is that sales tone? Or could you articulate a little bit of what that means? Because that's, I think, really dangerous, where I don't know if they become overly enthusiastic or it sounds manipulative. What is it that tone change? And then go ahead and lead into give us an example of a real story. I think that'd be very helpful.
Yeah. So the two things that the buyers mentioned when I asked them to explain what this sales pitch sounds like, one is that literally their tone of voice changed. So they would be having a conversational tone like you are having right now. And then it changed to, all right, Bob, there's 3 things you got to do, or there's 4 reasons why you got to buy my product. You know, and the voice gets sexier and deeper, and it's very intentional, and that maybe their countenance on their face changes a little bit, and it just becomes a bit Tony Robbins-ish, that just, they recognize that immediately. And the second thing they said was the words coming out of their mouth sounded scripted and memorized instead of ad-libbed, which, and you and I are having this conversation right now, and we start a sentence, we kind of stop halfway through, we change our mind, we stutter a little bit, that's how conversations go. But when you start into a memorized sales pitch, it just becomes so obvious, even without the tone of voice change, that you're reciting something that's memorized. So that's one of the pieces of advice in the book is don't memorize your stories. Remember the major facts. And that way, every time you tell the story, it'll sound a little bit different. You'll stutter and stammer your way through it a little bit differently each time. And that's okay. It'll sound like you're having a normal conversation. And you are supposed to be having a normal conversation. Okay,
so go ahead and give us an example of a story. Maybe you can also, I'd love to hear, because I don't think I'm a natural storyteller. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a good storyteller? What are the things, and where in the book can people find that information?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example that happened to me and my wife actually just last year. So back in May, my wife and I were at an art festival or an art show in Cincinnati, Ohio. My wife was looking for a picture for our kids' bathroom at home. And we get to this booth of this underwater photographer, a guy named Chris Goog, just does this amazing work pictures of sea anemones and coral reefs and just mesmerizing stuff. And she gets attached to this picture that to me looked about as out of place as a pig in the ocean. And it was odd because that it was a picture of an actual pig in the ocean, right? And I just thought that was the craziest thing. And so when I get my chance, I asked him about it. And he said, oh yeah, it was the craziest thing. He said, so that picture was taken right off the coast of this uninhabited island in the Bahamas called Big Major Cay. And he said, apparently what happened was a couple of years ago, some local entrepreneur decided to raise pigs for a pig farm for bacon, I guess. And he bought all these pigs and he found this island that he could keep them on for free. Like, who wouldn't want that? So he throws them out on this island and he said, but look in that picture. And look back behind the pig up there on the beach. And I'm kind of squinting and I'm looking up there. And he said, what do you see back there? And I said, I don't see anything but cactus. And he said, yeah. That's a problem, right? Pigs don't like cactus. He said, so these pigs, right, they couldn't eat. And he said, the good news for the pigs is, not too long after that, a local restaurant owner on a neighboring island started boating his kitchen refuse every night over to Big Major Cay and dumping it offshore, right? Well, pretty soon these pigs start to smell this food out there and they're hungry enough, they get brave enough to dog paddle or pig paddle their way out into the water to get the food. And, 2-3 generations later, all the pigs can swim. And now they call it Pig Island, right? So like I'm literally at that point, I've got my credit card out and I slap it down. I'm like, we'll take it, right? I mean, 2 minutes ago, it was just a stupid picture of a dumb pig swimming in the ocean. But after the story, I wasn't just buying a picture of a pig. I was buying a story, right? That I get to tell to people like you and anybody that comes into my house, and I love telling it. And it's this history lesson and geography lesson and animal psychology lesson all rolled into one. And so the story made the picture so much more valuable. And it was just this off the cuff story that he told me. And when I told him I loved it so much, I wanted to put it in this book that I'm writing, he said, "Oh, well, that's fine, but I didn't tell you that to get you to buy the picture." And I said, "I know you didn't," which makes it even better, right? It was just a story that you told, but it worked, right?
Yeah, boy, that's powerful. I love it. All right, let me ask you, as we get kind of wrapping up here,
Mhm.
you talk to a lot of salespeople. One of the things that I took away from my takeaways from the book is how interesting it was that top salespeople managed to use stories at various stages of the sales cycle or throughout the sales process. What struck you as you talk to sellers, and you're big on the story, but what did you learn from salespeople that you thought, that's really interesting in terms of where and how they apply stories?
Yeah, I was really surprised that great salespeople are using what I call storytelling throughout the entire sales process, from as early as introducing themselves to a new prospect, to building rapport, to the actual sales pitch itself, to resolving objections, to even like negotiating price, closing the sale, and then even service after the sale. And like I had imagined it just being used in a few places, and so I ended up coming up with a list of like 25 different concrete types of stories that great salespeople are telling, and some of them really surprised me. Like, one of them was I call it coaching the breakup. There's this one company that they noticed that one of their biggest problems after they had really made a sale was that their clients, or their new client, was having difficulty firing their old supplier so that the new salesperson could start, shipping their product. And so they started collecting stories about how their previous clients had successfully broken up, fired their previous, supplier, and in an emotionally satisfying way that wasn't too scary. And so they would tell those stories to help their new clients ease into this process. And so that's one of 25 different examples of just brilliant uses of storytelling throughout that process.
What a powerful way to bring value as a seller to the sales dynamic without pitching.
Yeah.
To just share, to think of creative stories in a way to share where you're absolutely delivering value and setting yourself apart from other sellers. Paul, let me ask you, where can people find you? Where can they grab the book? How can they keep in touch with you? And talk a little bit about your podcast as well.
Yeah. So thank you. All that stuff can probably best be found at my website, which is www.leadwithastory.com. So that's just the name of my first book. Sell the stories there too, the parenting with a story. The podcasts are there. I've got a couple of different podcasts going now, one for leadership, one for parenting, starting one for sales folks that hopefully you'll be a part of here very soon. And they can also find out what else I do for a living, which mostly is coaching and training and consulting on storytelling for leadership and sales teams and things like that. But it's all on that website.
Okay, so it's leadwithastory.com.
That's right. Thank you.
All right, Paul Smith, I love this book. I love that it's unique. I love that you're bringing a great angle. It was so much fun, even hearing you just now articulating phases of the sales process, and you're not even a salesperson.
Right.
But
I'm learning from the best folks like you, though. So
you've become a master of selling. And I mean this, I was honored to write the foreword to this book, and I believe that salespeople that implement this will experience incredible change. But I want to put a shameless plug in while I've got your first book is what hooked me. And that's what started our relationship. You showed me the power of the story, and reading about you in the boardroom or the CEO's office, wherever the venue was, where you had that big meeting with the CEO of P&G, and he sat with his back to the screen.
Yeah.
He didn't want to look at your slides, and he wasn't going to turn around, and you had to learn right then about how to tell a story to keep him interested. And
right.
Guys, this guy gets storytelling and how to use it. Go do yourself a favor and grab Sell with a Story. And while you're out there on Amazon, grab Lead with a Story by Paul Smith. Paul, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to bring you to the sales community.
Fabulous. Mike, thanks so much. I really appreciate being here.
You got it.